Welcome to the first Instillery Top Shelf Tech Chat. I'm Jeremy, Chief Product Officer and Technology Officer at the Instillery, and I've got Ryan Joe with me today, Product Manager at the Instillery, and we're going to talk about 10 gig fibre, ultra fibre, or hyperfibre as it's been called. So Ryan, there was a trial that kicked off late last year by a couple of LFCs. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, look, I know it's pretty limited availability and stuff. I remember being around when GPON products first launched when I was working in product management at Spark, and how much that kind of changed the industry. Be interesting to see how much this changes things up and what that actually means for consumers, price points, that kind of stuff.
I think that's the key. You mentioned GPON, which is a ability to split the light waves, basically share it between multiple consumers. That's really the big change here around these products being available on GPON networks. Actually, 10 gig fibre has been available for a long time if you were either willing to pay a lot for it or light it yourself.
A lot for it, yeah.
Yeah, a lot for it. So it's really about the, kind of becoming a commodity, I guess. And that makes it available to a bunch of other businesses or end users that may not have had it before.
Yeah. Hopefully at a much lower price point. I remember back probably 5 years ago when we were still running 1 gig handovers to service, thousands of customers, and here we are having 10 gigs to homes, like directly to consumers. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I think the first 1 gig products before GPON came in, you're paying probably about $1,500, $1,600 a month retail, and then with GPON products, you immediately drop that down to sort of $150, $200. So it's a massive change, and means that I guess we can now get high-speed connectivity into a lot more businesses and people's homes. But what are people going to use it for? What do people need 10 gig for?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think that when you look at what most people are using today, even running 4K and 8K, what's a 4K stream, like 25 megs or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And I think 8K is around about 100 or something like that. If you're thinking about running 100 8K video streams within your home, maybe it's a great idea. But I think most of the issue is going to be people are not having issues on the access, the last mile access anyway.
Yeah,
it's stuff like Wi-Fi limitations, it's in-home stuff, it's old devices, all sorts of stuff.
I think we'll come back to that because I think that's a key point, right? You're upgrading the last mile access, but there's a whole lot of other pieces that actually also need to be upgraded. But you're mentioning 4K, 8K. We're expecting more VR streams and stuff into homes, but also gaming starting to shift now. So Google announced
Stadia.
Yeah, so streamed gaming, so you're not actually, keeping all your processing power and that on your local console. So that's, idea being you get a cheaper device in your home. You don't need to fork out, $500 for the latest PlayStation. You pay a subscription, you stream it down. So it's kind of a shift as well, I guess, from services. You're running that stuff in the house to actually streaming a lot more different stuff. And everybody talks about, things being, doing what Netflix did to video, and it's probably kind of the same with Stadia and gaming.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really interested in how Stadia goes, to be honest. Eric got one with the only pops being overseas. It's quite a massive latency, and latency I think is going to be, we experience a massive issue. I'm still really intrigued as to how they're going to get it down. They've got some latency optimization thing. How they're actually going to get it down, because physical distance is physical distance. Speed of light, speed of light. You can't change a lot of that. So if you think about bandwidth requirements, is 10 gig going to change any of that? No, not at all.
I think that's a key point. A lot of people still don't understand the difference between latency, which is the time for something to go from point A to point B, to bandwidth, which is the number of things you can send at any one time. So 10 gig, we're adding more lanes to the road, but we're not necessarily making the road shorter or bringing the destination closer to you. So gaming, which is latency sensitive, and other applications, the speed of light is the speed of light, which is what fibre runs over. To some extent, this doesn't fix it, but there may be other things that come that sort of start to address that, closer delivery out of peering exchanges or local POP sites. But I think that's one of the things that people have sort of talked about with fibre, and in particular, there's been talk about unbundling and how that may help create products that are very specific for use cases like gaming. But even with unbundling, so therefore not using the ISP's equipment or the LFC's equipment, using your own equipment to light it as typically as an ISP, doesn't necessarily solve that problem either.
No, I remember looking at that, or more specifically looking at economics at it very early on. When GPON first launched and they set a date for when they would unbundle the fibre network. We had an initial think at Spark around what we were going to do with that. I don't think there was any definitive conclusion, but it really came down to, do the economics make sense?
Yeah, and I think the price point of the wholesale inputs for GPON fibre are so low, you do wonder if there's a commercial case for it, and so I think you really are almost trying to find those specific use cases where you could build a fibre product that's built for a very specific end user requirement. However, you probably only find that stuff is economically viable in major centres anyway. So I don't know. I'm not convinced that unbundling is actually going to add a whole lot.
I remember when we looked at it for DSL, and I recall vaguely there being some conversation about driving innovation by having competitors being able to put their own kit and cabinets and stuff. Do you know much about what that might mean?
I think there's a lot of talk about it and about innovation. I don't think we really ever saw innovation per se. I think it did just become an economics piece, and cabinets that were in high density areas got unbundled because that was cheaper, and in low density areas they didn't get unbundled. So I'm waiting to see what that use case looks like.
Do you think it was more of a lobbying position to
people to... I think there's been a number of marketing stunts around it. We've seen people sort of mid last year put out some stories around unbundling and talking about how they've lit stuff to 10 gig. The reality is they were using dark fibre, which has been available for years, and so it wasn't really a true test of what they could do with it. So personally, I think it's been more of a marketing piece for some ISPs to be able to go out and say we should unbundle because hey, we just pulled a stunt and lit something 10 gig. But the reality is there isn't any sort of real innovation that they're saying if we do this, I can deliver this product to end users today, and that's something that they don't have.
What do you think the drivers are behind 10 gig fibre?
I think for 10 gig fibre, one of the things that's quite interesting is we've always been chasing bandwidth. Previous to UFP, where ADSL, you were saturating connections, exchanges would get busy at times of day, or even stuff like bad weather could the rain and the ground copper and wasn't a great combination, and so you're always sort of at your limits of bandwidth, and everybody's trying to just get can I get to 12 megabits per second, can I get to 20, then VDSL rolls out, and of course you had to be within I think 900 meters or a kilometer of the exchange, which and have reasonable quality fiber, and it was just trying to get to that point that you could reliably have multiple things accessing the internet in the home, and we've kind of gone well beyond that now. So I think we've got the supply, and it's just about generating the demand now. So what is it that's going to get delivered into the home? And I think that's kind of the flip. It's always been the other way around. Like people wanted to stream, Netflix, or people wanted to, do whatever they, was going to be more bandwidth intensive or game with decent reliability, and you're always just trying to get enough speed, enough performance to do that. Now I think you've got the performance. It's what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's just because of where I was working at the time, or I just had a kind of bias in the stuff I saw. But I know there was a lot of negative press around UFB when it first launched. But if you look at how the rollout's gone, particularly relative to countries like Australia and other places around the world, we're pretty bloody lucky to be where we are, I think.
Yeah, I think people pointed out at the time that it was a generational change in investment that laid the groundwork really for us to be able to continue to expand and build stuff on connectivity stuff on top of a decent quality physical network. And I think you've really seen that. The speed that we've gone from, I think, a lot of the initial products were 50 meg, 20 meg up, and then 100 became pretty common. Now you got your gig products, 10 gig, and I think with the hypervibe fiber products, they're looking to do sort of 2 gig, 4 gig, 10 gig type splits. Just that rate of change has gone, way beyond where you were with, the rate of change around copper.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to what you're saying about being a generational change, it certainly was. I mean, I remember just the issues when that first rolled out in terms of people's home wiring, all sorts of poor quality stuff. But it's come a long way since I was looking at it like 3 or 4 years ago. So.
Yeah, totally. And look, we use a lot, connect people up in our business, the Instillery, to SD-WAN offerings, primarily around making sure they're connected to cloud services. Now that a lot of that's no longer sitting on premise, you're accessing Office 365 or AWS, whatever it might be, and you can actually now affordably go and connect up all your locations around the country with cost-effective connections. Whereas in the past you couldn't. Actually, you'd find that when you got into some of these areas, you're paying a huge amount of money to get 10 megabits per second worth of reliable business access, and this is just kind of flatten that. But kind of brings us to another point around business use of GPON products. Some people have said they're not, shouldn't be used for business, or that you need to buy higher versions of them with better SLAs to be able to use them. Well, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing?
Oh, look, I think businesses are now able to take advantage of lower price points than they were before. I remember looking at some fibre installs in excess of $200,000 or $300,000, which is nuts. It's crazy. And I think that really the SLAs around restore and stuff are super important in terms of resilience and redundancy. Looking at other connections, potential carrier diversity and stuff is super important. Again, I think that more and more businesses using cloud-based apps or accessing stuff, more of their traffic being internet bound as opposed to WAN bound is super important. You're seeing an explosion of that at the moment. I remember when one of the big issues was customers would come to us and say, how do we rate limit people looking at YouTube and stuff during their lunchtime? Because I'm running off like a 20 meg ADSL connection or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Or they were buying some, bandwidth out of a data center that was, sold as very expensive, very special bandwidth, right? And typically it actually wasn't. I think, the change we've seen is we just bundle internet with basically every connection now, so people can do direct internet breakout. And I think we've talked about the economic change with GPON and that local access, but also having the 3 international carriers now, and in particular not having that Southern Cross monopoly. That's just dropped international bandwidth prices so much that now you can afford to just say, look, you get 100 meg down at your office and wherever Dunedin or something, and that 100 meg, you can use 100 meg to the internet. We don't really care. Whereas in the past, you had to bring it back to somewhere and then say, okay, now you're going to share 100 meg between 20 different offices, and that it was really expensive. Now that that's changed as well.
Well, what do you think about if you think about the old MPLS networks and WAN connection, that kind of stuff? Not just looking at the internet access layer, but the whole connectivity thing. How do you think the economics has changed around that?
Oh, I think stuff. Funnily enough, national bandwidth and backhaul in New Zealand got to a point where it was more expensive often than buying international bandwidth, and that's changed again. One of the big differences, I think, is Chorus introduced a product around attaching backhaul to a tail. So for an extra $7 a month or something on a connection, you didn't need to buy buy expensive backhaul and, overcommitted and stuff. If you're an ISP and you're going into a new region with your own equipment, you typically had to buy a gig minimum, if not more, which was expensive for those backhaul links at the time. And then, you had to get enough users to justify the economics of that. So you kind of you get rid of that problem by being able to take it on. So I think overall the whole, the whole market's shifted, and the benefit being to the customers that you kind of no longer need to worry about, stuff just really a waste of people's time. Like, I need to, reduce YouTube use at this time, or, whatever it might be. And instead you can, you fill your boots, worry a whole lot less around the connectivity piece.
With availability, SLAs as they are, or as they actually performing at the moment, what do you think a real big advantage is for not going down the GPON path? Or
yeah, it's an interesting question, because if a digger goes through a core fibre, right, the guy that's in the ditch splicing them in the middle, in the middle of the night, isn't sitting there looking at the fibre lines going, which are the business ones, which ones have the higher SLAs, right? So it depends what you're protecting against. So one of the things that we find with the Bitstream 2 products, which is the most basic GPON product, is it doesn't, the SLA around the ONT, doesn't have one unless you pay for an upgraded SLA. So people say go buy a Bitstream 3 product, for example, which does have an SLA around the ONT being the piece that lives in your office or your home and actually terminates the fibre. The reality is, in a lot of cases, you can just, you're still not protecting against that core fibre cut. So two things that we find quite useful. One is use a 4G connection, put it on a shared data plan or something like that, so you only pay for what you use across the offices. That's pretty cheap insurance. The second one is actually putting in a second Bitstream 2 connection can be more cost effective than a single Bitstream 3 connection, and that actually gives you two ONTs. So while you don't have an SLA, you need to request an extra ONT from the LFC, but then with two ONTs, if one fails, it's not an SLA issue. You've actually got another one sitting there. So you kind of build it to the use cases. There's still main offices for businesses in CBDs typically, where we may put in a second fibre provider to prevent against the cut in the ground, the fibre being cut. But you just kind of you've got to consider what scenarios you're actually trying to build for, and then construct the solution around the what-ifs.
So what do you think more people aren't taking up SD-WAN and these standard GPON access towers?
Oh, I think there's still a lot of FUD out there. There's a lot of businesses that their P&L is premised around keeping people on those, so they want to protect that revenue. That may mean that you don't always get the full story of what SD-WAN and what Bitstream 2 can do for your business. So I think there's a little bit of that, but I think the other thing is people, this is stuff that's typically been contracted in 3-year to 5-year cycles, and so there's a lot of businesses that are just still under contract, and as those contracts come up for renewal, they're starting to explore new options.
Cool.
Yeah. So one point you raised earlier that I think is a good one that I'll throw back to you. You mentioned what happens in the home or with the your firewall, your router, your Wi-Fi. Talking about even 2 gig products, what do you think people are going to have to start looking at in their house to support using effectively using 2 gig internet?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know what the best way to explain it is, but if you think about the weakest link in a chain or where the tightest bottleneck's going to be, your experience on your device or whatever depends on, factors ranging from your device, how it's connecting to your modem, how it's connecting to the LFC network, and then how it's accessing content, whether it be locally or whether it be through a cache or something like that. Like you said earlier, if you think about 10 gig taking away that access layer constraint, you still need to think about the other things. And even with people in ADSL connections, it's really interesting. A lot of the limitations are still in a home. One of the big things I think is going to be, I'd guess that there's a very small percentage of customers who have a modems capable of handling 10 gig. I'd probably even say that majority of customers have only got modems that can handle some are even 100 meg, let alone anything higher than that. Wi-Fi also a massive limitation. I think that a lot of streaming issues that people have actually probably are not outside at home. It'll be things like poor connectivity, but basic stuff. I think there's a lot of education that kind of needs to happen around that, where you're just going to drive more issues.
Yeah. Well, I know the standard router that I got from my ISP with 100 meg fiber or gig fiber. They are pieces of junk. They really are. They even they do struggle with 100 meg. They really struggle with too many simultaneous streams. So you often, even that stuff at relatively low speeds, you end up needing to upgrade it. Then Wi-Fi, like you say, doesn't operate so well through walls and particular stuff like that. So you've got things like Google, who have introduced their own mesh Wi-Fi, so you can put multiple devices around your home, and they'll actually help boost the signal and do it in a simple way. You've had Wi-Fi repeaters in the past, but making that actually simple and accessible to people, I think that's really important.
I think the cost of those they're like $5.99 for three or something, isn't it? It's quite expensive. Plus, you've got to have one right by the access point hooked in.
Yep.
So you kind of got two access points. I think it really depends on what you got sitting at home. I'd certainly recommend talking to an expert about how to get the most out of it, because most people we've got a really complex setup at home.
Yeah.
Run a bit of kit.
Surprise.
Yeah. So we're running a couple of Ethernet over power, so power line kit for like the really latency critical devices, so gaming PCs and just the TV, the stuff we don't want to run off Wi-Fi. Anything else, like even general streaming, Wi-Fi is good. But the biggest upgrade I think we made was buying a new modem. We can get Wi-Fi down the end of the street now, and it's no issue. So.
Oh wow, yeah. I think, and flipping that round to a business context, often it's a firewall or an SD-WAN device or something you're putting at the edge site, and you're trying to use gig or more bandwidth. I think one of the key things we see with that as well is looking at what happens when you turn all the features on. So if you're going to run, if you are running SD-WAN or some VPN technology, you're encrypting everything before you send it over the wire, which is great, but that does take some performance. You turn on stuff like deep packet inspection, IDS, IPS, some of these sort of features, they actually start to really impact the performance as well. And so I think there's the home user side to it. Upgrade your modem, look at your Wi-Fi, make sure you do invest in that. And to your point, it's not always cheap. I think similar from the business perspective, it's not always cheap either. You've got to actually get, if you're going to use a fully featured device, in particular a security device, adding those features, adding the something that's got sufficient capabilities, going to be really important as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation when I was at Spark, because we knew that user education would stop a lot of our troubleshooting calls.
Yep.
But there were so many barriers to solving it. I guess one lesson was that if we were going to invest all this money to uplift the entire industry, what kind of commitment will we get from other ISPs who would have that flow-on effect?
Yeah.
But also, even basic stuff like you say, the cost of actually upgrading your standard ISP modem is probably a massive thing. So we knew there was be a huge reduction in calls. There was stuff around how much we invest in it. There was also even agreeing on some of the finer technical details was quite difficult.
Yep.
But I think, I don't know what the solution is, to be honest. I know a lot of people have tried, not just ISPs, but other groups out there, even including things like NetSafe and stuff, have talked a bit about it. So,
look, I think my view is this is really great to see the increase in availability of these UFB products. We are really lucky with what we've got in this country, and it's so easy to just look across the ditch and see what's happened with Australia's rollout, and they just don't have an asset like we do, and I think that will end up holding back them as a country in future years. So in my opinion, the UFB rollout was a massive success. It's really done exactly what we would have hoped for it to do in terms of that generational change, and now we're just starting to see these things happening that 10 gig probably 8 years ago when this stuff was starting to roll out probably seemed miles away, but we're there already, and I think it's fantastic to have that kind of a connectivity platform available.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to be cynical, right? Like looking at what are the motivations behind doing this, and everybody's first blame the ISP, but I mean the reality is if you're launching 10 gigs to consumers, at a really reasonable price point, you know, at a reasonably significant cost. If you look at the cost of support that across both the LFC and the ISP to be able to match that, it's not insignificant.
Sure.
And the winners are really consumers of that, right? So
Absolutely, yeah. And I think consumers are the ones that have won with the UFB rollout. So, you know, we're really excited to see these sorts of developments around UFB. We look forward to using these products with our customer base. And that's it for us for our first Instillery Top Shelf Tech Chat. Cheers.
thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.